welcome one and all. It's time for yet another red hot, spicy, tingling, dishlicious old world battle report. Dwarves versus Orcs and Goblins. Now, this would have been up on Friday, the usual battle report evening. However, I was preparing to run 2 tournaments at the weekend and baking about 3,000 cakes for those tournaments. So it was a Kings of War tournament on Saturday and a Dead Zone tournament on Sunday. And obviously, that takes up a lot of time, and I might do a video on that at some point actually, what goes into running 2 tournaments in one weekend. But anyway, let's dive back into the old world, because we've got a slightly more combat-themed Dwarven list compared to usual. So, first of all, you can see here that the scenario is command and control, so there'll be bonus points available for holding the piece of terrain in the centre of the table. We've got a packed house in the chat already. Look at all those hundreds of messages just scrolling by endlessly. So let's go through my list. Less guns than usual. Let's see if it works. We have got, in this first shot, you'll see, we've got Rangers. There are 16 of them. And this is the first time I've given them throwing axes as well as their other weapons. So great weapons, shields, crossbows, and throwing axes. So the reason for throwing axes is because you can use them to stand and shoot from any range. So even if the enemy get right up next to you, which they may well do, because they deploy further forward than the rest of the army, so they're going to be within range for the enemy to deny a normal stand and shoot much quicker than the rest, so they're going to be able to use their throwing axes for that. We've got the gyrocopter with the steam gun, as usual, makes it in there. In the centre here, this is a controversial unit of Iron Drakes here. So, rather than 5 with a torpedo, we've gone for a unit of 8 Iron Drakes with a Trollhammer torpedo. The thinking behind this is, I want to tinker with the rare section of the army a little bit, and the way I was running it, there wasn't much room to manoeuvre. I was previously running 2 units of 5 Iron Drakes with torpedoes and 2 organ guns, and that was nearly all of the points at 2,000 points. So there wasn't much wiggle room there. So I'm tinkering and trying some different things out. Even though the Trollhammer torpedo is undoubtedly the MVP of the unit, I feel like having 8 in there makes it an extremely scary proposition for stand and shoot purposes compared to just 5. So like a unit of 5 knights charging into them, I think they're going to be much more terrified of 8 of them than they are of 5. And that's the reasoning behind that. We've got 1 organ gun, controversially, not 2 for a change. Seeing how we do with just 1. And what's this? A unit of hammerers behind the shooting stuff? Yes, this isn't the only one. There's another one further down that we'll get to in a moment. But 2 units of 8 hammerers with no command, and they are drilled. Mithridas says, 8 Andrakes is a detachment. No, they are not a detachment, because in a detachment you can't take any command models, so you wouldn't be able to use the Trollhammer torpedo, for my understanding. So they're not a detachment. The hammerers are behind some shooting units. What I'd run previously is having a combat unit like this next to the shooting stuff, but then when they get charged, you then have to do painful wheels or turning on the spot to look at stuff, and by the time you turn around to look at it, it's already gone through and is on to the next thing. So we're going to try these small, hard-hitting units behind the guns. 8 hammerers drilled, so if they need to change their formation a little bit, to fit through or to get more models into combat, then they can do that quickly. Then onto the Death Star. Now this wasn't necessarily intended to be a full-on Death Star, but when you see the full map and how everything's been deployed, you'll understand why all the characters got shoved into this unit. So we have, first of all, 16 Iron Breakers with a command. Oh, actually, before I go on, the Iron Drakes also have the Cinderblast bombs as well, which are really good for stand and shoot against units that aren't monsters or anything like that. Anything where it's just lots of individual crummy troops, the Cinderblast bomb is really good because it's multiple hits, so very tasty. Back to the Iron Breakers. 16, full command. Who's in there with them though? They seem to have a lot of characters. So first of all, they've got the BSB. And the BSB doesn't have anything fancy going on apart from a shield. No real upgrades there, just to keep him nice and cheap. However, we then have a Runesmith. The Runesmith has 3 runes of spell breaking, which is the auto dispel rune, and he's my only magic defense in the whole army other than just the magic resistance of the units. So the Runesmith is there next to the BSB, so he can auto dispel 3 spells as long as I get him into range, and that's why He's in this unit. They're going to be possibly moving forward a bit. So there's no anvil in the list. Highly controversial. We'll see how that goes. Saved a lot of points. And when it comes to the auto-dispel runes, it's just as effective on a runesmith as it is on a more expensive hero. You just have shorter range on it. Then we've got a king, who you can see there, which is represented by the Belagar Iron Hammer miniature. And the king is tooled out with a very specific combo, which I'm pulling up on my app now. So he's got full plate armor and a shield. Then he's been given several runes. So he's got the Master Rune of Alaric the Mad. So no armor saves are permitted against his weapons. He's also got Rune of Might, giving him +1 strength as well. Then armor runes. He's got 3 runes of shielding, which adds up to a 4+ ward save, which is quite tasty. Then there is the Rune of Passage for move through terrain, which will be conferred to the whole unit, not just him as well. So, ward saves to keep him alive, no allowing of armor saves when he punches you with his weapon, with his big mighty hammer. And that seems like it should be quite a fun combo. We'll see if this unit actually gets to fight. When we have a look at the full battlefield, you can decide whether you think they will do any fighting during this game. The reason I'm slightly more confident that they'll be able to do some fighting is because I'm up against Orcs and Goblins, who generally want to fight you, with at least some of their units, so we'll see if they come towards me. Then we've got a bolt thrower there, with no runes on it. And over here we have got some dwarf warriors. So the precise number of dwarf warriors we have is 18, and they have a command as well. We've got 5 thunderers, and my opponent was asking what's the reason for a 5 thunderer unit, and the reason is it made me up to exactly 500 points, which was required in core, and I just wanted a little bit more shooting, but I didn't want to invest too heavily. So this is the minimum size for a unit of thunderers, and they are still a bit of a threat, but they're very cheap as well. So 5 thunderers is only 50 points, and if the enemy are dedicating resources to go after them, that's something that's not attacking the rest of my army, and if you don't chase after them, 5 handgun shots are definitely not to be sniffed at, so they could actually get something done. Then we've got a cannon on the hill as well. And what have we given the cannon? Let's have a look here. So the cannon has been given the Stalwart rune, which gives it +1 combat resolution. So you may remember in a recent game, one of my war machines got charged by a Banshee, which is ethereal, so I couldn't hurt it, and it was just winning the combat by doing a wound to the crew, or losing the combat, or, well, it wouldn't be losing the combat, but it would be winning or tying the combat at worst, really. So if you have +1 combat resolution, then you can potentially win a combat against an ethereal unit. And obviously I'm not up against vampire counts in this game, but that's the thinking behind it. Then we've got another 8 hammerers there, who are also drilled, and they are defending this bit of the gun line. So we've got 2 decent fighter units, Ironbreakers and the Dwarf Warriors, with some decent heroes in this unit. So the Runesmith in there is going to give everyone nice armor bane, which is very nice. And in this unit, I would have put a character in here as well, into the warriors, but the way it's been positioned, it looks like they're less likely to fight anything that's potentially juicy. By the way, don't forget to like this video and subscribe and all that good stuff if you haven't already, for some strange reason. Who have we got in the chat? We've got Bad Squiddo Games watching an old world battle report. I can confirm that Annie is actually going to be diving into the old world at some point with the vampire counts, so you can look forward to seeing that. You can see the gyrocopter has made its vanguard move up there. And what we're up against. So, Orcs and Goblins. There are some boar boys, 6 of them. There is a Doom Diver. There are some Orc... Are they still called Orc Arrow Boys? I'm going to assume they are. We've got the Goblin Spear Thrower. We have a level 4 spellcaster on a Wyvern there. We have got a unit of Goblins with nets and Fanatics. We have got an Orc character on a chariot there who's going to be quite fighty, represented by this enormous pig. We've got some Black Orcs in a nice wide combat formation, so they're quite scary. We've got another Doom Diver, another unit of Goblins, and they've also got Fanatics. And if we go back, I think this guy is a character in the Goblin unit, and there's a wizard there as well. So 2 spellcasters, both level 4, and the spells we're going to be looking at are things like Plague of Rust, Fireball. I think the Wyvern one has the Ruby Ring as well, so there's going to be additional Fireball coming from that. There's Plague of Rust, and the usual kind of terrifying spells to dwarves, anything that's going to mess with your armour or toughness. And we've got some lovely over-the-shoulder of the Iron Drakes shots now. So I've positioned my Iron Drakes with a good view of the Black Orcs, because I think they're a good target. They're not too fast, so they're going to take a while getting towards me, and I'm going to be able to shoot down some of their nicely armoured troops with these Drake guns. Cannon overlooking the whole battlefield from this side as well. So as the enemy advance, I'm going to be able to shoot down the flanks of some of the units, unless they all line up perfectly behind this tower. And if they do that, that means they're not coming towards me, which is probably good because it means I can shoot them for longer. Now look at that. You can see in the background a human arm. There was a game going on the other table as well, which I think was Blood Bowl. I think that's what they're playing over there. So, in the first turn, you can see that the Black Orcs have been buffed up, represented by this token. My opponent didn't have any tokens, which is a scandal in itself. So I passed over one of my tokens to represent I think that's a ward save that's been applied to the Black Orcs. And, well, here's an interesting situation for you. These boar boys are impetuous, which means they have to do a test to determine whether they are legally forced to take on an available charge. And I've put my rangers right in front of them on the left flank. So, they do not want to charge here, because it's far enough away that there's a good chance they won't actually make it, but they'll still have to suffer a stand and shoot if they do charge, which would be hideously nightmarish for them, because there are 16 crossbows there. And any 6s to wound, of course, would be Armor Bane 2, so that's going to be quite scary. And, what do you know, they actually fail their impetuous roll, have to declare a charge into the rangers, and here are some nice wound rolls, and some not so nice save rolls, and all the boar boys are dead. So it's not even my turn, and I've already shot down 6 boar boys who didn't even want to charge me, but they were forced to. So that is quite a humorous but potent start for the dwarves. And anytime you have a scouting unit like that, and you can position yourself in front of a unit that is obliged to charge you, either because of impetuous or frenzy, then you can create some interesting situations like that, where it's not even on your turn, but you're still able to dictate to the enemy what they have to charge, and then you can kill them with a stand and shoot. Sounds good to me, and it worked out nicely on the table there. Now, you can see here, this is where all the meat is in the Orc and Goblin army here. We've got the 2 big monsters, although technically that one's a chariot, it's just represented by a giant pig. Then we've got all these Black Orcs, we've got Goblins with Fanatics. This is the scary section of the army. Doom Divers are pretty scary as well, but they're obviously not going to be moving too much. The Rangers over here, if they commit too much to the Rangers, they're not going towards the rest of my force, and I'm going to push my Iron Breakers up the middle and try and meet the enemy like here, because I'm not blocking off my shooting lines of sight, which is from this sort of direction. And there are there's one large target here. I'm not sure about this one. I think just this one is the large target, but there are units on the hill as well, which I can also shoot over the enemy troops and over my own troops. So, what does the Doom Diver do in retaliation for the boar boys being shot down? It lands a direct hit on a cannon and kills it in 1 hit. So, yeah, I wasn't entirely familiar with how Doom Divers worked in this edition, and they seem pinpoint accurate, and when they do hit, they are pretty tasty war machine killers, and I don't know what a good counter to that would be. If anyone can think of a particular rune that you can put on a dwarf war machine that makes it resistant to being hit by a Doom Diver, let me know, because that seems very powerful. Because not only does it reduces the scatter distance by the ballistic skill, you also steer it with the Goblin as well. So, on average, how much are you steering it back? I think the average is like 5 inches you're steering it back on target. So unless you scatter it like 8 or 10 inches, or it misfires. So that's 50% of the sides of the dice are going to be bad and 50% good. So if you only scatter 2, 4 or 6 inches, you're generally going to be able to guide it back on track very easily. Which is a pretty good rate, I would say, for a war machine. It's better than a regular stone thrower for accuracy. And doing D3 plus 1 damage as well. So it's more than a dwarf cannon. And manages to kill off the cannon with one shot. So cannon doesn't get to shoot. It's a very eventful start to the game. The other Doom Diver takes out 3 dwarf warriors from this unit. And 1 iron breaker is killed as well. I think this is from the spear thrower. Okay, so you can see we're going to have to start dealing with this whole mess here. My rangers are going to be shooting, probably now that I've seen what the Doom Diver can do. I'm going to start shooting at that, I think. And then I'm going to march up my iron breakers. Because this unit of iron breakers, with all those heroes in there, is quite a scary prospect. Turn 1 for the dwarves. So the Thunderers take the unusual step of moving down off the hill. That's because there's really nothing on this side of the table here of any consequence. So they're going to have to do a bit of walking to get into the action. The gyrocopter has flown all the way up here. What I would like to do here, because none of the fanatics have been deployed, I would kind of like my opponent to drop out a couple of fanatics right now and move in the direction of the gyrocopter, because it's just far enough away, so on average they won't make it this turn. And then after that they move in a random direction, so there's a chance they'll just go straight into the woods and die, which is what I would like to happen. So that's the reason for the gyrocopter being positioned there. It is a risk, of course, because they could just hit it. But we'll see. I want to get the fanatics out of there so fewer of them have a chance of reaching the iron breakers, which are the one unit I don't want the fanatics to touch. Or the war machines, but that's going to be quite a distance. Then over here I've turned my iron breakers to get into this area as described earlier, but not blocking up my line of sight yet, because at the moment I'm shooting black orcs and I don't want to obscure them. And these dwarf warriors heading that way. Now I think I've done this incorrectly with the hammerers, because they're drilled so I can redress their ranks. So I don't know whether I should have been able to turn them all this way and then still move that far. But I think the intention was correct. There is some element of correct in this, because you can redress the ranks. I just don't think you can change your facing, because that's a reform rather than a redress. So they probably wouldn't have been able to move quite this far, because there's not much on this side, so I want to get them into the action. I think maybe they should have had to move a little bit less there. Then we've got some shooting, and wow, there's 1 wound remaining on the Doom Diver, which is sad. I haven't managed to kill that. And killed a black orc. Done a few wounds. And yeah, not much accomplished in the shooting phase. I actually killed more in the enemy's turn than I did on my own there. So not the best opening shooting salvo from the dwarves. And into the goblin turn. And the rangers are hit with a double whammy of debuffs. So they've had their armor and their toughness lowered from enemy spells. I'm not able to do anything about it yet because I don't have my runesmith in range. Goblins have moved up here, probably with one eye on releasing their fanatics at the start of my turn, which is a thing you can do now. Black orcs move up into position ready to get into the fight as well. And the chariot hero, you can see there have been some wounds dealt as well. I did drop some wounds onto the heroes, but not much in the previous turn. And the goblins are right in my face now. So these goblins, I'm going to have to deal with them. The rangers, of course, because they're right there, and I'm not going to be able to charge the iron breakers in yet, so I've got one more good turn of shooting before they're really on me, and we'll see whether the fanatics cause any carnage as well. So this turn, the Doom Diver lands a perfect hit on the gyrocopter and kills it. The other Doom Diver lands and goes for the iron breakers, and hold on, how many were in that unit? Let me go back. Did kill, looks like 3 got killed there. So that's sad. But we've still got a mighty fighting unit here. Then, what's this? A 6/6. So there was a horrible, nasty, evil spell cast on the rangers, which I think was a fireball. And I used my fated dispel once per turn and rolled a 6/6 and stopped it. So there you go. The rangers are not being attacked despite all the debuffs on them, so that's very good for them. I think they may have taken... How many have we got there? Have we still got the full unit? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yep, so the arrow boys didn't kill anybody yet. Turn 2 for the dwarves. So the fanatics are released right in the face of the rangers, which is not going to be pretty. The other 3 fanatics from this unit have popped out as well. And one of them goes all the way through the Iron Breakers and the Organ Gun, successfully rolls high enough to get that far. And one of them kills 3 Rangers. And the other 2 also go through the Rangers and whittle them down to just 7 models now. So hopefully I've got enough to finish off the Doom Diver on the hill with their bows. And another fanatic here goes through the Warriors and kills a few of those. But I'm not too unhappy with this. And it is actually my turn to do some moving and stuff now as well. So you can see the Organ Gun didn't die, thankfully, but we've lost even more Iron Breakers. So this is still a potent unit. The King is really the meat of the fighting force there, with his attacks not allowing armor saves, of course. And the enemy haven't been having too much success with spell casting, by the way, up to this point. So I was expecting a devastating salvo, but a lot of the spells have been failing. Perfidy says fanatics scare me. That is a valid concern. Fanatics and Doom Divers are very scary. The Black Orcs take some more damage from my shooting. The Rangers managed to finish off the Doom Diver on the hill, so that was good. Everyone else just repositions a little bit. I've been charged now in the next turn. Into the Goblin turn. The Goblins charge into the Rangers. And a Fanatic goes through them as well, because the Fanatics move in the remaining moves, I think, which is after charges. So because they're moving randomly now, it goes randomly through both units and kills Goblins and Dwarves. Another one stops a millimetre short of the hero on Chariot, which is funny. And the others, you can see one's gone here, and the others have gone, but my Organ Gun has also gone. So one of them hit the Organ Gun, and then I think the other one went straight into the Fanatic, so they killed each other. And there's another one that goes through the hero here and does some damage. So it's down to 3 wounds on the Chariot. And Doom Diver, what's it going to accomplish this turn? Kills some of this Hammerer unit, who are heading this way. So this piece of terrain in the middle, it is worth, I think it's 200 points to you, if you can control that at the end of the game, which is a nice little bonus if it's a tight game. The Rangers, you can see there's a challenge issued, the Ranger Champion and the Goblin Hero there, are having a bit of a fight. And Combat Resolution, with this handy-dandy Combat Resolution counter in solid gold, and by that I mean it's plastic. So the Rangers manage 2, and the Goblins get up to 7. So because of that, the Rangers do flee into the difficult terrain. The Goblins don't catch them though, which is good. So that one Ranger is still alive. It does mean I'm going to be rallying on a double 1 going forward though, which is not ideal. And I'm now in a position where I could think about charging the Black Orcs, but I've got one more decent round of shooting, and I've got the Iron Drakes primed and ready to start blasting again, and they're at closer range now. Still got the Thunderers, who can be shooting maybe at these Goblins, if I don't charge them with the Dwarf Warriors through the Fanatic. This charge is available. I think they're in range now, but I'm thinking I'm probably going to be shooting the Black Orcs at the moment. It's round 3 for me. So the Fanatics move again into this Hammerer unit that had already taken some casualties from a Doom Diver. And more Fanatics, more damage, more carnage. This one, I think, just misses the hero on the Chariot again. And one of the Fanatics on the left-hand side goes all the way through the skirmishers. So let me go back and show you. So it's this Fanatic here. Now, there are gaps big enough within this unit. They are all keeping coherency, but there are occasional gaps where this Goblin Fanatic could have landed had there been space. So we did have to consult the rulebook. We consulted some other players as well to see exactly how it works. Because the Fanatic travels through a unit and comes out the other side. So when you're a skirmish unit, what is considered the other side? And we were theorising, like, what if you had a huge, like, U shape of a unit, and the Fanatic went in one side, and it'd just pop out on the other side of that side of the U, surely. It wouldn't go all the way to the other side. So if there is a gap for you to land in, I assume you would stop there. You wouldn't have to keep going right to the back of the unit. However, because of the precise angle of the scatter, the random movement, it did actually end up going down a path where it couldn't be placed until it reached the back anyway. So, interesting thing to think about there when you're positioning your skirmish units if there's random moves involved. Where are you leaving the spaces, and is there somewhere that things could be placed? And especially interesting if you're thinking about vortices. If there's a vortex that you think is going to be cast on your skirmishing unit, and you position them in such a way that moving it through them doesn't take it really close to the rest of your army, because if it can't stop on top of them, it'll just keep going. So if you position your skirmish unit in a long line, for example, it would just bounce across one miniature, and then it would then find a place to land. If you've got them in a long line vertically, then obviously it would hit the front one and then just keep going until it stops. So interesting things to think about there. Because units and vortex spells can't occupy the same space. So think about, or units and other units can't occupy the same space, which we've seen in previous reports where things will flee and they'll end up fleeing halfway down your own army because there's nowhere for them to stop. So you've got to think about these things. My dwarf warriors do just charge straight through a fanatic into combat and end up beating the goblins. The iron drakes do some more damage to the black orcs. We've heavily whittled them down now, so they're definitely not looking as scary, but the same could be said for the iron breakers, who took some damage as well. The bolt thrower unleashes, and there's only one wound left on the chariot now. So that is a situation where this chariot, if we were at a tournament, we were discussing, my opponent would not be charging that pig, that chariot, into anything. When you're down to your last wound against an enemy that can stand and shoot, now is the time to run away, really, and hide, because you're preserving those points. If you're a big monster or an expensive hero, then all you're doing by charging in with one wound left is getting yourself killed and giving up the points. You're better off just hiding at this point. However, my opponent also said, because we're not in a tournament and it's not a very orky thing to do, then it is just going to be charging into something. So we'll see how it goes. Charges are declared. So chariot into the iron drakes, which is almost certainly a death wish, into 8 of them. And black orcs into the iron breakers, which is going to be an epic showdown if they get there. So the black orcs, the weaponry they have, half the unit have shields, half of them have great weapons. So depending the order in which you take them away, that will determine what kind of save they have. And it's a very weird, complicated situation. So I think if you have more shields than not shields, you can have the benefit of the shield save. So if you take them off one at a time and keep a majority with shields, I think you then have the better save. But you're getting the best of both worlds, because some of them do have great weapons, so they're going to be hitting harder. So some intricacies of the list building there. It does mean the ones with great weapons are going to be on low initiative. And let me just look at my army list for a second, because I want to check whether my iron breakers actually have a standard on them. Let me see. Because obviously you can take standards that take away initiative bonuses on the charge, for instance. But I don't think I actually used it in this list. Oh, so there's one that takes away the charge bonus, the initiative, basically giving you a disordered charge, and there's another one that means you can't use lances and that kind of thing on the charge. But not in this list. I've been using them a lot on hammerers. So if the enemy do get in, even with great weapons, their initiative will go up, and they'll be able to strike first before some of my models. Not all of them. I think the king has got a decent initiative, so he'll be able to strike at worst at the same time as them, even if they're charging. Now, the Black Orcs do make it in. However, here's the interesting thing. They cannot actually fit. They cannot close the door of the charge. So that makes it a disordered charge. If anyone thinks this has been played incorrectly, then let me know. Because of the iron drakes here, they don't actually close the door properly on the iron breakers. So the iron breakers then have to swing a bit to close the door, which therefore makes it a disordered charge, which means they don't get their initiative bonus. Does that sound correct to everybody? Because that's how we played it. If that's wrong, I'm sure that'll be 98% of the comments on this video. But that means that the iron breakers have got a pretty good chance now to swipe a few of them down before they get to hit me. And one of the fanatics, I think, rolls a double and just dies, which was there. The other one heads off in this direction from the hill, and we've got another one that's just milling around in no man's land. The Wyvern, level 4, is flying away because it doesn't think it's necessary to be down here anymore. It's heading off to hide behind the tower from my bolt thrower, I think. My 2 hammerers remaining in this unit move up as backup to the Dwarf Warriors and the Goblins there. And we've got this combat rumbling on. The Dwarf Warriors win again. And on to turn 4 for me. So the hammerers have gone wide because I feel like the Iron Drakes might be about to be charged by something soon. You can see obviously they killed the chariots with the stand and shoot, as you'd expect. They only had 1 wound left. I've shot some wounds onto the Wyvern with the Iron Drakes. The Dwarf Warriors run down the Goblins this turn, the regular Goblins. And look at this. The Iron Breakers. So let me go back. And okay, did I actually get a good picture of what happened in the combat there? Don't think so. There you go. So from over the top you can see. So my Dwarf King killed a good chunk of the Black Orcs before they could strike. A couple of others I think went down to the Iron Breakers and the Runesmith as well. They've got really good armor bane with a Runesmith in there. And then the Black Orcs didn't do that much in retaliation. They had quite a poor round of striking, so they definitely lost there. And then in the next turn I was able to defeat them again and run them down. So there you go. Looking pretty good now for the Dwarves. Killed the Black Orcs. Obviously this is quite a scary block of Goblins for Iron Drakes to deal with, but they will get a stand and shoot because they're still in the front at the moment, which is why I didn't angle them at all. We got out a little arc measuring thing just to check that it was still in the front arc, so they would get their stand and shoot. And then behind them I've got the hammerers as backup. I've got units around the tower, so that's looking good. These Orc Araboys have been quite ineffective actually. On to turn 5 for the Orcs. My Dwarf Warriors have been cursed with some kind of curse. I think they've had their toughness or armor save reduced by the level 4 on Wyvern, who's hiding behind the tower from my Iron Drakes now. And shooting into the Iron Breakers, not going to be too effective because they're very heavily armoured. And yeah, not a very effective turn. The Goblins are getting in position to go after the Iron Drakes next turn. And turn 5 for me. So I've got my handguns, Thunderers blasting away at the Wizard. My Iron Drakes blast holes into the Goblins, so I'm able to use my Cinderblast bombs there, which do hit and deal loads of damage, which is really good because it's at close range. The Iron Breakers have just turned round to face the incoming threat, which is these 2 units. And I've got a huge bundle of points here, which isn't really under threat, so I'm very pleased about that. And it's looking very healthy. Turn 6 for the Orcs and Goblins. And there's not going to be too much more action in this game because there's not a lot more that can be done. A Fanatic goes through and kills another Araboy, I think. The level 4 turns round and I think he manages to kill the last 2 Hammerers, which does pick up some points. And the Doom Diver kills an Iron Breaker, or it could have been the Araboys that killed him. So the Hammerers are gone. We've still got another unit of Hammerers here. And in my turn, I'm going to be able to try and declare a charge there. If they decide to flee, I'm just going to try and shoot things down. But it's looking very good to close out for the Dwarves. Turn 6, blasting away, get the level 4 down to 1 wound. The Dwarf Warriors, who were here, make a charge into the Doom Diver, and they kill it, smash it to pieces. The Iron Drakes shoot down some Orc Araboys. And there you go, that's going to be the end of the game. So I have units that are able to control the terrain in the middle. I don't think the Orc Wyvern counts for those purposes. I think you need a unit of 5 models to do it. So I've got the middle, and I've got a decent number of more kills as well. So we worked it out, if it was in a tournament setting, it would have been a 15-5 to the Dwarves. Now, obviously, this wasn't in a tournament, so there were some suboptimal moves going on, such as the Orc on a chariot charging into the Iron Drakes, knowing that it was likely to die from the stand and shoot just because it was Orky. In a tournament, you probably wouldn't be doing that. But apart from that, I think it's a good illustration of how powerful a Dwarf combat unit can be, and the weird situation that came up with the lack of initiative bonus for the Black Orcs isn't that unusual, because of course you can use the standard to prevent the enemy getting their initiative bonus against dwarves anyway. So that's something I'll be looking into. This Death Star did a pretty good job because it actually got to fight. Now, could the enemy have just chosen not to fight it? Potentially. The Doom Divers were very effective at hitting war machines, so could they have had the shooting supremacy? Maybe not supremacy, because Iron Drakes are probably a bit harder to hit than a war machine. Maybe, because it's just one model that you're landing on. And I think it's the one under the hole that's the one in danger. So you'd have a really high chance of killing one, and then I think the others, it'd be much easier for them to survive the hit. Whereas a war machine, you're landing with all your force on this one thing that's only got 3 wounds. So it's really good for taking out war machines, as we saw earlier on. The Fanatics are obviously really good. They did some good work, but it wasn't enough to thin out my ranks enough. The Black Orcs did roll terribly in combat, but I did kill them with my king with his weapon denying armor saves. Turned out to be very important there. And in a tournament setting, how likely is it this Dwarf Death Star would get into combat? Probably not very high, but it wasn't really intended to be a full-on Death Star. One of the heroes at least was going to go into the Dwarf Warriors, but after deployment, after my opponent had stacked up everything mostly on this side, I realised that they weren't going to see much action. At best, they were going to fight a unit of Goblins, which they ended up doing, and they didn't need a hero to get that done. So I piled everything into the Iron Breakers. And assuming that my opponent would want to at least try and contest this area a little bit, because it is the scenario of the game, they were moving in that direction. I was confident they would get to fight something if the Fanatics and magic spells didn't kill them first, which is why they've got the Runesmith in there. So if the enemy wanted to move into range to use things like fireballs on the unit, then that means they're in position to have their spells auto-dispelled. And you didn't hear me talking too much about magic later in the game. That's because once the Runesmith got in range, then I was able to shut down the important spells, and other than that, my opponent wasn't rolling particularly hot with the magic either. So it was quite effective anti-magic, this. A lot of the really damaging spells that are going to target you want to get into within range, and then they're in range for the Rune of Spell Breaking. So, do I have enough shooting to draw the enemy onto me? Against a lot of lists, I think I do. Against a list like this, I think the Doom Divers are so scary, I'm not even sure. So I'm actually thinking, because this is a legitimately scary thing to face, this Doom Diver list, I'm thinking that miners might actually come back onto the menu. Not to counter like dwarf war machines, which I don't think are particularly optimal or popular at the moment, but against an army that wants to move forward but also has war machines, miners, that's the kind of situation they're going to thrive in. Because even just a tiny unit of like 5 of them coming on here or here, and they're going to move towards the enemy and then next turn charge them. So they're going to be able to threaten it, whereas a gyrocopter, you saw what happened to the gyrocopter. It just got murdered horribly. So it can perform a similar role to the gyro, but I've only got 1 gyrocopter model, so it would give me more options for closing down this kind of unit if I can just get to the back of the board early. Against a true gun line, the miners, I would say, are next to useless, because the war machines, you're just never going to be able to get to them, because the enemy aren't going to be moving forward enough for you to actually come onto the table anywhere. Because you have to be, is it 9 inches away from the enemy, 8 inches, something like that? So you have to actually end up probably like down here, and then it's more like 3 turns to get to the machine, because there's going to be units around the war machines on both sides in a true gun line. But if the rest of the army's moving forward and they're just leaving behind a couple of machines, that's when the miners do actually have a use. And it's not that much of an investment. Let's see, a small unit of miners, let's see how much that's going to cost. So if I add a minimum sized unit of miners, that is 60 points. If we give them a prospector with a steam drill, so that they can reliably come onto the table, that is 86 points, which actually sounds quite expensive for just 5 miners. So yeah, I'm not even sure whether the prospector and the steam drill are worth it for a 5-man unit. So let's drop them. So it's only 60 points now. 60 points for a unit that isn't going to come in reliably, is only 5 models, but could threaten the back of the table. What do we think about that? Is that a use for miners? So it's only a small investment, so in games where you don't have anything at the back of the board to chase after, then you can just bring them on, maybe on your own side of the board, behind your own machines, to protect them in the same role that the hammerers were taking in this game. And if you do have a good target, you bring them on near the enemy war machines to threaten those. So yeah, I'm looking at miners as an interesting option purely because Doom Divers exist now, and I now know what they do. Other than that, I like this list. I don't know whether I'm going to run exactly this at the next tournament, because I do actually have a third organ gun now, which is calling out to me. I've got the 80s organ gun with all the spikes on it. I've got that on eBay. So I can have one organ gun from each era, which is the dream. So I could run 3 organ guns, and I think I can run those and also the unit of 8 iron drakes. I really like that, actually, more so than the 5. They were very, very scary. They dish out some good punishment, and the stand and shoot is very scary as well, compared to just 5 of them. Having those 3 extra dice for the stand and shoot is quite good. You do lose a Trollhammer Torpedo, which is sad, but it is a very competitive section of the list. So, let's see if I can make a rare section of the list that contains, let's see, 3 organ guns and the iron drakes. Let's see how many iron drakes we can fit in there. So, I think I can fit in 7 iron drakes in a unit and 3 organ guns, can I? Oh, that's 501 points, so I would have to drop the Cinderblast bombs if I want to keep the Trollhammer Torpedo. So, yeah, 2,000 points, you can just fit 7 iron drakes with a Trollhammer Torpedo and 3 organ guns. Now, I don't think that's the optimal way to put your rare list together. I think iron drakes are better. I just think organ guns are so cool, and they're just my favourite unit. That's why I'm trying to fit as many of them in as possible. Obscurminator says, every dwarf battle report I see feels like the dwarves struggle to dictate the flow of the game. I think going all in on rangers and miners would at least feel a bit more active. Yes, rangers are certainly a good choice, and in this game you saw that I was able to dictate early on what those boar boys could do. And most armies that I'm coming up against, they tend to have something that's either impetuous or frenzied. It's not that unusual to see that in army lists. So using rangers to give them problems, forcing them to charge from a distance that's not a guaranteed success, meaning you get your free stand and shoot basically. I think that's a very nice little strategy, and we'll see whether that's a thing that I'm able to pull off at a tournament, or whether people position in such a way that I'm not able to do that. That's going to be something I'm looking for now. If I can see any unit that you can force to charge by being near it, putting a scouting unit in front of them. Very tempting indeed. And stand and shoot, very good on the rangers, and even when you get into combat with them, you probably don't want to be doing that either, because they've got great weapons and they're super wide. So I think rangers is just very good. I don't know whether taking many more of them is going to be optimal, because you will get very wide then unless you go into ranks, and then you get very expensive for some models that can't shoot. And yeah, the 5 Thunderers, I'd quite like that actually. It didn't cause the enemy too much alarm, so there wasn't much that was threatening them. They weren't targeted by anything particularly, and they were just able to chip away wounds onto units, which is kind of what they were in there for. Too small to deal with, but big enough so they can actually chip away with a wound here and there. So I quite like that as a unit. I could try the same thing with a small unit of Quarrelers, so they've got slightly longer range. Yes. I think it's a pretty good little setup here. Where would I drop the points to fit in the extra organ gun? Let's see. I've spent a decent amount of points on characters, but less than the cost of an anvil. So I may be able to do without the anvil. The cannon, it's usually disappointing, the cannon. You don't often see the perfect unit for it to deal with, which would be like a deep unit of heavily armoured warriors or knights that you can shoot into the flank of. Those are just the perfect units. But even then, the cannon only actually has AP 2. So against knights that are going to be on a 2-up or 3-up save, they're still going to have a decent armour save at the end of it, unless you roll for the armour bane successfully. So, not too sold on the cannon, so maybe the cannon drops out. But that does limit the ranged capabilities as well, because it does have 48-inch range, which is longer than the organ gun, or the Iron Drakes, for instance. The bolt thrower is nice and cheap, so you could basically take 2 bolt throwers for the price of a cannon, almost. And they are less likely to hit, probably, because you don't have a very good ballistic skill. You can't use an engineer's ballistic skill. But when it does hit, it's got just standard straight up AP3, so it's more likely to punch through the armor. So bolt thrower, I think, is quite a good choice. So I think it is the cannon that would come out. So let's delete the cannon from the list and see how many points that's looking like now. So the list as it stands, I think I've accidentally added something else into the list as well here. Oh yeah, let's ditch those miners from the list now. So I'll continue to tinker with this, because there is a tournament in, when is it? Two or 3 weeks, I think? Start of June. So I'm looking at doing the triple organ gun there. And we'll see what else I can come up with by then. I've got another game coming up probably on Thursday at the local gaming club, and there'll be another battle report most likely on Friday. I'm also going to do a video on the tournaments that I ran at the weekend, which were Kings of War and Dead Zone tournaments, featuring lots of my homemade cakes, and a spinny wheel, like a game show wheel, and how that was used, because I'm a believer in not only innovating scoring systems, trying to come up with something different to encourage particular styles of play, but also just adding weird stuff that makes the day a bit more interesting at a tournament, a bit more exciting. So a spinny game show wheel, you can see how that was used. And hopefully other TOs will see that and start doing more and more outrageous things at their events. You don't want things that are going to complicate the event, just add a little bit of fun, I think. That's the goal. So you can hear about that probably this week sometime when I get around to making that video. I'm also going to do a video on my Stormcast Eternals and Age of Sigmar and which of my units are obsolete now, and which of them I care about being obsolete and which ones I don't. Look forward to that. Speaking of Age of Sigmar, actually, I've seen the new stuff from the starter box, and my quote is something along the lines of, none of it's particularly exciting, but I'll probably end up buying all of it. Which sums up why GW is so successful. I'm still saving up money for the impending Dwarf release as well. I'm going to be spending all my money on that, because it's dwarves, and I've been holding onto this army for years, and I'm going to take advantage of the availability of those models as and when it comes. So, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description. There is various social media shenanigans in there as well. The Discord server, there is Twitter, Facebook group, all that good stuff. And obviously, if you want to keep this channel afloat and allow me to buy even more gyrocopters, then why not pledge all your life savings either on the Patreon or PayPal donations so that I can just go out and buy 3 gyrocopters at launch. Wouldn't that be lovely? And then I could chase the enemy around the table and not worry about them being able to stand back and throw out vortex spells at me. Just chase them all down with 10 gyrocopters. How does that sound? That's going to be fun for everyone, and the enjoyment you would get from watching that unfold on a battle report live stream, I think that's got to be worth a small portion, or indeed your entire life savings. Am I wrong? I think the answer's no. Okay, time to wrap this one up. And I think all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are.